Mina, how does this Dolphins offense need to evolve with Tua back at quarterback?
I wouldn't put it on Mike McDaniel and the scheme. To me, just watching them, a huge issue was the run blocking. And they've got a couple of free agents on the offensive line, Greg Little and Brandon Shell. Teron Armstead, when he's in, is amazing, but he's had injuries. To me, it reinforces the need to improve the offensive line this offseason. That is job number one for this Miami offense. One, to protect Tua better, but also so you can run the football.
I agree with Mina. I think the aspect is this. When this team had to drive the football field, they couldn't. You know, like when they had to be methodical and efficient and go on long drives and control the football. And when defenses, we have these conversations all the time. We are not going to allow you to be the big play, chunk play-oriented passing game. Easier said than done. But when teams force them to do that, they struggled with that a little bit. That's attached to the run game. It's also a little bit more attached to an efficient passing game as well. So they've got to figure, now that they have a season just about of tape with Tua and Mike McDaniel together and how all these pieces fit, teams are going to be very much so focused on, we're not going to give them that stuff. We're going to force them to play the style that we want. If they don't find ways to be more methodical and the ability to drive the field over the course of 4 quarters, this offense is going to be good. It's just not going to be like playoff caliber type style.
Orlovsky is 100% correct. Without an offensive line that can make the running game efficient, the Miami Dolphins would be looking at a bleak 2023 season.
Hi, I'm Butch Barry. I'm the offensive line coach.
With the Miami Dolphins hiring Butch Barry as their new offensive line coach, maybe they're making strides right now to address that. Butch Barry, Matt Applebaum, whoever, if you don't have the right players on the field, the offensive scheme up front is not going to work. Butch Barry formerly coached the offensive line for the Denver Broncos, and he also coached the offensive line for the Miami Hurricanes. The Dolphins haven't had much luck whatsoever with the offensive line coaching, as they've gone through 5 separate offensive line coaches in as many years. Recently, there's been a lot of chatter about Butch Barry, and most of it's been quite negative. Allegedly, former players dogging him, a lot of texting going back and forth, a lot of crap out there about Butch Barry. And I'm telling you right now, don't worry about any of that. Just ignore it. Just, scroll past it. It means absolutely nothing. As a former offensive lineman, I'm going to tell you why. No offensive line coach anywhere will succeed if he doesn't know the system, and no offensive line coach anywhere will succeed if he doesn't have the right players to play in that system. I was a center. I benched close to 600 pounds. I squatted a little over 800 pounds. If I was blocking for the run game, you were in trouble. I could manhandle you and knock your dick in the dirt. However, my weakness was on passing plays. If a passing play was called, it was likely I was going to be in trouble and may need help from a guard. If I couldn't get my hands on you, more than likely I couldn't catch you or slow you down. I wasn't slow myself, but I didn't have that kind of mobility needed to do pass protection. I was built to pound you, and no offensive line coach anywhere was going to be able to change that. Same thing with the Dolphins. In Mike McDaniel's offense, you have to be able to have a mobile yet strong offensive lineman. It requires a wide zone blocking scheme, and you have to have the right players in the right positions to make it work. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble. I think you're going to see the Miami Dolphins make quite a few moves during the free agency period. If I'm Chris Grier, I want an offensive line coach who can assess players and tell me, who do you need to get into the locker room? If Butch Barry can break down films and assess the right players that are needed to succeed in this offense, the Dolphins are going to do fine. All year long, I could tell that Matt Applebaum couldn't do that, or just the wrong players were on the roster. That's not saying that this past season was made up of necessarily bad players, but these were players who didn't fit the offensive scheme. But here's a big reason to think that Butch Barry was the correct hire. All over Twitter, you see people comparing the offensive line stats from the Denver Broncos, and they're not looking at the right numbers. That team was a nightmare. Ignore all of that data. By the way, if those text messages you're seeing on Twitter are real, that speaks more to the character of those guys than Butch Barry. I wouldn't want people like that on my team. I wouldn't want to have to coach people like that. On a side note, do you think that Vic Fangio and Bradley Chubb didn't give Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier some insight as to what kind of guy Butch Barry was? But I digress. Back to what I was saying. A truer picture of Butch Barry emerges when you look at his jobs before the Denver Broncos. Guess where he was before that? Yep, he was in San Francisco working with none other than Mike McDaniel. And as an O-line assistant with the 49ers, guess what kind of blocking scheme he managed with them? Yep, a wide zone blocking scheme, which incidentally is the same blocking scheme that the Miami Dolphins run. During the 2021 season, Butch Barry worked on the same coaching staff as Mike McDaniel. So you know, coming from the Shanahan tree, he's well versed in the wide zone scheme. But if all of this isn't proof that Butch Barry is the right hire, I have one more question for you. Remember this, Mike McDaniel is going into his second year. And as with any employee who's judged on his performance, he's going to be in somewhat of a hot seat. He has to win this year. I'm not saying that he has to win the Super Bowl, but I'm going to tell you right now, 9-8 ain't going to cut it. And I guarantee you, he knows that. So if he obviously knows this, don't you think he's going to get the best coaches and the best players to work under his system that he possibly can? Of course he is. Oh, and one last thing that's really important. Mike McDaniel also knows that his fortunes are tied to a somewhat injury-prone quarterback. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins need a healthy Tua Tagovailoa in order to win. If the Dolphins are indeed gonna ride or die with Tua, they better keep him on the field. If Tua isn't protected and the Dolphins season tanks, you can bet that Butch Barry, Mike McDaniel, and probably Chris Greer are going to be looking for jobs this time next year. So I'm pretty sure all three of them know this, which tells me that Butch Barry is obviously a good hire, because he has to be. Let me know what you think about Butch Barry being hired for the offensive line position, and if any of this information has helped you feel a little bit more comfortable. Talk to you soon. Fins up.
Is anybody catching on to this Barry guy?